my friends, you have my fondest hellos. Indeed. Now, I have an ancient tale for you, but first, do remember to like, share and subscribe to this channel. It all helps to put these tales in front of more folk. And the more we grow, the more legends we can share. Yes. Now, the tale I have for you here and in the now is one that tells of a young and brave hero who has a journey into the unknown, which has been told many times and in many ways, both here in Mansin and on Avalon too. So, if you're ready, I'll tell you the tale of Jack and the Beanstalk. Yeah! Yes. Once an age ago, in a small tumble-down cottage in the country, lived a widow and her son, Jack. They were very poor, and Jack often went to bed with an empty belly, as he would insist his mother eat the last scrap of food. Their only source of money was their beloved old cow, who was producing less and less milk. One fateful morning, Jack tried to milk her, but his bucket remained stubbornly empty. With a heavy heart, he told his mother, who told him to take her to market to sell for a good price. Jack was heartbroken, but dutifully agreed and headed down the road, leading his bovine friend slowly. No sooner had he rounded the corner of the lane than an old man appeared, as if from nowhere. Jack was frightened, but a very polite young man, so he bade the old man good morning.
"I'll buy your cow off you, lad,"
The man offered.
"and save you the long trip to market."
Jack looked doubtful at the man. Dressed as he was in rags, he doubted he'd be able to get a good price off this stranger. "What will you offer me?" he asked. The old man held out his hand, and in his palm were 5 of the driest, oldest-looking beans Jack had ever laid his eyes on. He shook his head scornfully and made to leave, his patience depleted. But the old man stepped in his path.
"Don't be so hasty, young man. These beans are full of magic. Plant them on your land before sundown, and you're sure to have a grand adventure."
With that, he shoved the beans into Jack's hand, took the cow, and vanished. Far quicker than Jack had thought possible. Jack had no choice but to turn back down the lane and return home. When his mother saw the beans, fury did not come close to how she felt. She snatched the beans off Jack, threw them out of the window, sent Jack to bed, and wept bitterly all evening. Jack lay in bed, furious with himself for being so foolish. It was well past midnight before he eventually drifted off into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, Jack woke up with his insides aching with hunger. The second he opened his eyes, however, all thoughts of himself disappeared. Curious shadows spilled over his bedroom. Jack headed to his window, opened his curtains, and stared in shock. A truly enormous plant was growing from right where the beans had landed. Sure enough, each thick tendril was heavy with ripe beans, just begging to be picked. Jack reached out to pick the closest bean, thinking how they could sell them and have some money once more. When he stopped and looked up, The beanstalk reached far higher than any plant Jack had seen before. It almost looked as though it would reach the sky. Without another thought, Jack climbed out of his window and began to climb the great plant. Higher and higher he climbed, much higher than the tallest tree in the woods nearby. Jack climbed on for what felt like hours until at last he reached the very top. There, who should he see but none other than the old man who had sold him the beans.
"Ha ha! Well done, boy!"
he cried.
"I see you have a taste for adventure." Now, listen closely. Down that path is the house of a great giant. This giant killed your father after losing a wager and made off with all your riches. He took your gold and 2 magical items. A hen that lays eggs of pure gold and a harp that sings the sweetest music you'll ever hear. Your poor mother feared you would seek revenge if you knew, but you're old enough now to avenge your father and reclaim what's yours.
Jack listened in disbelief, but then stood up tall and headed down the path the old man was pointing to. After a time, he came to a gigantic manor house. Jack could hear a woman singing through a nearby open window. He knocked as hard as he could, and soon enough the door opened. A giantess opened it, frighteningly enormous at first, but with a very kind face. She took one look at Jack with his dark shadows under his eyes and his dirty clothes, and ushered him in for a drink and a hearty meal. No sooner had Jack swallowed the last morsel when an almighty crashing shook the room. Thunderous footsteps bounded toward Jack, and the giantess, quick as a flash, she swept Jack up and dropped him into the sunpot.
Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be living, I'll be dead. I'll grind these bones to make my bread.
These words sent chills down Jack's spine, and he almost gasped in terror as the giant entered the room, even taller than his wife, with none of her kindness in his eyes. He was truly a creature of nightmares. Jack peeped through a crack in the pot as the giant started to search the kitchen. His wife quickly reassured him he was imagining things. Luckily, he was soon content to eat an enormous meal. After he had eaten his fill, the giant called for his money, and a gigantic sack was placed before him, and he began to count. He hadn't got very far when his eyelids began to droop, and he was soon snoring gently, a sound which rivaled a thunderstorm. The giantess was nowhere to be seen, so Jack, feeling slightly guilty at betraying her kindness, crept out of the sunk pot and hoisted a sack of gold over his shoulder. As quick as he could manage, he ran back to the beanstalk and climbed down. Jack's mother had been frantic with worry that her son had seemingly disappeared. A quick explanation later, though, and soon she was overjoyed at never being poor again. For many months they worked on fixing their house and clothes, until one day Jack was unrecognizable. His clothes were so fine. He had not forgotten the other two items the giant had stolen, however. One morning, when his mother had gone to market, he climbed the beanstalk a second time. The giantess opened the door, still smiling kindly, but not offering to let him in. Jack had to beg and plead, reassuring her that he had no need to steal from her. Eventually, he was allowed in, but only given a cup of water and a crust of bread. Again, the second he had swallowed the last crumb, the giant's terrible footsteps rang out.
Fee, fa, fo, fum! I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be living or be dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread.
The giantess had barely managed to conceal Jack in the salt pot when the giant entered. Once more the giantess distracted her husband, and he gorged himself on another huge meal. When he had finished, he called for his hen. A perfectly normal-looking hen was placed on the table.
Lay, hen!
The giant thundered. Immediately the hen began to lay gleaming golden eggs. Time and time again she lay until the giant's eyes drooped and he fell fast asleep. The giantess was in the next room, so before she could return, Jack leapt out, scooped the hen up and sprinted to the beanstalk. When he arrived home, his mother was thrilled to have her darling husband's magical hen back. They settled back into their new life, but Jack kept finding himself thinking of the final treasure, the magical harp. One night, while his mother slept, he climbed the beanstalk once more. When he reached the giant's house, he searched until he found a mouse hole. He crept into the house, as silent as he could be, for he knew the giantess would turn him over to her husband if she saw him again. He could hear the lullaby played by the harp, floating from a cavernous bedchamber. So he tiptoed towards it. Sure enough, the magical harp was stood by the giant's colossal bed. Jack reached out to take the harp, but the second his hand closed around it, the music changed. No longer was it a soothing lullaby, but instead became a piercing, wailing shriek. With a roar, the giant and giantess leapt up, and Jack bolted.
Fee, fi, fo, fum! I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be living or be dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread.
Jack's terror propelled him faster than he had ever run before. He leapt down the beanstalk, slipping and almost falling several times. To his horror, the beanstalk began to shake as the giant followed him down.
Fee, fi, fo, fum! I smell the blood of an Englishman. Be living or be dead, I'll grind his bones to make my bread.
Jack threw himself the last few feet, landing painfully, but leapt up and grabbed an axe from the pile of firewood nearby. He threw it with all his might at the beanstalk again and again, until at last it fell with an earth-shattering crash. the giant was crushed under the great weight of it. Jack's mother ran out and gasped in shock at the sight before her. But Jack showed her the harp, and she knew this was the monster that had taken her husband from her. Freed from the burden of being poor and the terror of the giant, Jack and his mother lived in health, wealth, and happiness until the end of their days. Yes! Well, didn't that Jack do well, eh? Righting the wrongs that giant had done to his family, and in doing so, providing for his mother. Yes! One must always look to the care of their mother. I mean, for us elves, when we had kings, it was their mother who was crowned queen. I digress. Yes. Now, if this has given you any ideas for a tale of righting wrongs or setting off into the great unknown, then do email me at bard.elven.tales@gmail.com with your elder, of course, and I'll make them into a video, just like this one, and I'll take them back to Avalon to share with the rest of the elven folk too. Oh, and do remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel to spread these tales on your side of the mist. And I'll see you soon for more Bard Elven Tales.